Ali Clarkson is one of the best-known trials riders in the world. He's had an impressive career spanning 3 different decades, has competed at the highest levels around the globe, and has amassed a YouTube following of over 100,000 subscribers. He's worked with some of the world's biggest shows, including Cirque du Soleil and the Drop and Roll Tour, and counts global superstars such as Danny McCaskill and Jack Carthy amongst his close friends. As a teenager, Ali Clarkson was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, more commonly today known as autism, a neurodiverse condition that affects the way that he thinks and feels. And I have the same thing. My CV isn't quite as impressive as Ali's, but I've done alright for myself, and like Ali, in 2017 at the age of 31, I was also diagnosed with autism. And also like Ali, I've made a career out of being passionate about cycling. I've always been interested in Ali's story, and despite doing pretty much the same job for the last decade, our paths have rarely ever crossed. This probably has something to do with the 550 odd miles between where we live. Regardless of this, after a few emails, Ali kindly offered to sit down and have a chat with me about what autism means to him and how this has affected his life so far. Okay, Ali Clarkson, how are you?
I'm pretty good, actually. Yeah. How are you? Long time no see.
Yeah, very long time no see, I think. I can't imagine when the last time our paths would have crossed would have been. I mean, I was thinking about this the other day. We've only met a couple of times, I think. I think we met, we went to the Czech Republic once, in about 2005, I think. Like, it was a long
Wow.
time ago. Yeah, I think you were on Ashton, so it was a long time back.
It doesn't help that we live pretty much the opposite side of the country, does it?
I tried to work this out. I think it's about 550 miles. So yeah. So are you in Glasgow or are you just outside of it?
Well, I was in pretty much the centre of Glasgow, literally like probably a mile from the centre of Glasgow, but the guys have moved elsewhere. I've moved in with my fiance, and we're now about 15 to 20 minutes south of Glasgow.
So obviously you are. I think you're one of the highest rated YouTubers that there is in terms of trials riding and stuff, and you've done a lot of different things with a very, very long career in trials riding. Is autism something that you've ever mentioned on the blog? Like, because you've been going for about 5 or 6 years now. Is it something you've ever talked about with people?
I've not brought it up as a specific video, like content or a specific video, but I have brought it up, say, when I've done like live Q&As, possibly in videos when the I don't know, for some reason it's become relevant, but it's not something I've kind of been super vocal about. It's nothing I'm ashamed about, but I don't want to be one of those guys that when people think of me, they're like, oh, that's that autistic guy. You know, it's kind of like, it is part of me, but it's not what makes me, and I'm not shy about talking about it if the subject comes up, but then I don't want it to define who I am.
Yeah, because I learned that you were autistic actually from a trials forum post that was about, it must have been about 2006, I think. And someone else had posted something that said, I don't know if it was actually called the autism thread or something that on the nose, but it was something like that. And you put up a really nice, honest, open post about the fact that you were diagnosed with autism and stuff. How old were you when you got your diagnosis?
I think I was 15 or 16, maybe slightly younger, but it was a little bit later than some people, but I know these days people are getting diagnosed later and later, so perhaps mid-teens isn't that late, really.
Absolutely. I mean, I was actually diagnosed myself with Asperger's when I was 31. So it was quite a long time of all sort of the developmental years of my life not having that diagnosis. But for a lot of people, it is usually quite a long process from someone initially noticing that an individual is in some way different to getting, a clinical diagnosis, isn't it, for want of better words and terminology. How did your journey to getting that start?
I think my parents always knew I was a little bit different. So I've got an older brother and sister, and as far as we're concerned, they're not on the spectrum, although it's a wide spectrum, so perhaps they are in some way. But they managed to go to school, primary school, no bother, high school, no bother, university, no bother, and I managed to do primary school, all right. But then when I came to high school, something changed, and I really, really struggled with it to the point where I pretty much flat out was refusing to go. My mum and dad were like pretty much dragging me by my ankles, and I'm holding onto the stairs, like begging them not to let me go. And there's like people, kids, it's quite common not to like school, but to have such an extreme reaction, that's when they started to think something a little bit different's going on here.
I can really empathize with that because I had many similar experiences as a young person. But what was school like for you in terms of, was it like education that was like the actual subjects people were teaching? Was it trying to socialize with peers? Or, I mean, for me, I think the main thing for me was there were just so many other things I wished I was rather doing with that time.
Yeah, that I can totally agree with that. So it was kind of a bit of everything. I had a couple of friends, but I think most of my friends from primary school ended up going to a different high school. So I didn't carry over any of my friends from primary school. So I went to high school, and I didn't really know anyone there. There was maybe a couple of people I had vague friendships with, but I'd never had any deep friendships with anyone with high school. So at lunchtimes, I was kind of just hanging around. I was pretty bored, and the people who I maybe would hang around with were talking about football or rugby or things. I'm like, I have no interest in these subjects at all. I'd like, why are they talking about such boring things? And this is like, late 90s. Mountain biking wasn't such a huge thing. There wasn't the internet, so.
And I mean, trials was basically non-existent.
Yeah, so with me and my hobby, there was literally no one else in the school who was even riding bikes or mountain biking, let alone trials riding. So I had no one to talk to about my hobbies. And then the subjects themselves, I remember just being, say, in English class, learning about like Macbeth and Romeo and Juliet, and I'm like, we had to do tests where they're like, oh, what is the character feeling in this scene? I'm like, I'm like, that's impossible to know. I'm like, I've no idea.
I'm only laughing because it just all rings so true to all the things. I mean, I remember doing a school play of Macbeth and hating every moment of it. But sorry, go on.
And I'm just sat there and thinking, this is a prison. I hate being here. This subject is boring. I don't want to. I have no interest in anything we're doing, and I'm just like, this is torture. I can't stand it here. I can't believe they make kids go to, and I'm just like, I can't stand it there. I'm not going. I refuse to go.
And so you were, if I'm right, you're a little bit older than me. So I think you were born in the mid early 80s.
84.
84. So you were at school pretty much through the 90s, sort of similar to, I was probably a bit behind you and stuff. So one of my next questions was kind of like, what, you also went to school, I mean, if I understand, you grew up in Hebden Bridge in Yorkshire? So relatively rural Yorkshire, and I mean, I grew up in pretty much rural North Devon. What was it like being a neurodiverse person, in a place that was, I assume, relatively working class, and that maybe people didn't have a lot of time for what might be classified as mental health or neurodiversity, as it were? What was that like?
Oh, I can't remember back anything specific to like dealing. I think Hebden Bridge is actually a fairly decent place for people on spectrums. Hebden Bridge is extremely liberal.
I remember you saying in one of your videos, it's like the LGBTQ capital of the UK, or the highest number of people.
Yeah, so I'm not sure how PC it is, but it's certainly known as the lesbian capital of the UK. All throughout. Yeah, and even I went back there the other day, and so many rainbow flags and like women holding hands and stuff. So it is very out there and very accepted, which is great. So I think people there are very accepting of people and their behaviours, and and so on. So I don't specifically remember any particular difficulties with society in Hebden Bridge, but then again, I didn't necessarily go and do a lot of the normal things that teenagers or young adults might do, like go to pubs. I have no interest in going to pubs, going to clubs, anything like that. I was quite happy just to be on my own, which I think is quite a normal thing for people with autism. So it was actually great because I could go out into the countryside, I could go and climb trees, I could go like to local rivers. Like before bikes, I was super into wildlife, so I just go and turn over rocks and find wildlife and just spend a lot of time just outdoors in woods on my own, which is great.
And if you found someone else that showed the slightest bit of interest in that, would they ever get away from you? Because I remember being like that with anything that interested me. As soon as someone was like, "Oh, what's that about?" then it just became the Wikipedia article just came out of me at people.
Certainly, any kind of friendships I've ever had have been due to my obsessions, my interests. So as soon as I found bikes, if you weren't interested in bikes and I couldn't persuade you that bikes were great, then I probably wasn't going to hang out with you or engage with you too much. But if you were into bikes, then yeah, best friends, let's go out, ride bikes, do everything related with bikes, for sure.
That's a really common thing with diagnosis of ASD and stuff, is shared interests in and anything that other people can similarly sort of agree on, and struggling to sort of be interested in things which maybe aren't, of what you or I would particularly be interested in, which was, I think, a lot of school subjects. So, yeah. An interesting question I wanted to ask you was, when did you learn to ride a bicycle? Because I had stabilizers until I was 11 years old. And I couldn't get the hang of it. And then the change was exponential. I got into motorbike trials, and then I was riding, I think I was 11 when I learned to ride a bike, and I think I was 13 when I did my first competition. So the change was really drastic. But what was it like for you in terms of, did you struggle developmentally learning those things?
No, I don't. I think I learned to ride a bike kind of the usual kind of age. Was it like 4 or 5 years old, something like that? Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing fairly unique about that. I do remember my parents saying that I learned to walk really early. So usually I think with babies, they develop the brains kind of one aspect at a time. So it's unusual to find a baby that can like learn to walk and learn to talk at the same time. Usually one comes before the other. So in my case, I learned to walk at 8 months old, and then I learned to talk at 3 years old. So I was a real late developer with talking, but quite an early developer with like the motor skills and walking and so on. So I think maybe that's transferred over to riding as well. I never really struggled. Obviously, I had stabilizers when I was younger. There was no balance bikes, so I had stabilizers, then onto bikes. And I don't remember any particular struggles. I think it was a fairly standard journey.
In terms of autism, when we first were messaging each other about this on Instagram, you said there were definite like pros and cons to how autism has affected your riding career. What do you think, like have there been, do you think, any negative aspects that you can really sort of go, that's the ASD, that's autism that's sort of holding me back there a bit?
So the main thing I think the negatives are the social skills or the desire to be sociable. So I think a lot of getting sponsors and brands involved are the social aspects. So going out and meeting people. I know a lot of my friends' deals have happened because they go to nightclubs or they go drinking with the potential sponsors.
Is that how sponsorship is done in Scotland?
I'm not sure if it is in Scotland, but it certainly is in Europe. I know. So you go to these big events, Eurobike and so on, all the big brands are there, and at the kind of towards the end of the events, everyone just wants to cut loose, go and have some beers, maybe go to a nightclub if they're a bit younger, and that's the time when you want to go talk to them and get friendly with them, because pretty much most of the time getting deals and brands involved, it's who you know, not what you know. So with me, I really hate crowded places like nightclubs or pubs. I hate loud places where I struggle to hear what people are saying. I don't particularly drink. I don't like the taste of alcohol. I can go and drink, but it's not something I choose to do. It's something I would do very rarely. So for me, going to a pub to socialise and small talk, I really dislike doing that. That's like my idea of torture. But unfortunately, that's kind of what you need to do if you want to get friendly and involved with these brands to then come up with some decent deals.
But I guess on the other side of that, I mean, you've obviously you've enjoyed relative different kinds of success through your riding career, and I guess on the other side of that is the fact that you are not trying to be unnecessarily sycophantic here, but you are an incredibly talented trials rider, and maybe that has sort of balanced out that other people have gone, you know, people like Inspired or Tarty Bikes or Drop and Roll have gone, you know, it doesn't matter that this guy isn't that sociable, what he can do with a bicycle is incredible, so we want to be involved with that. Is that kind of where the positive has sort of been?
Yeah, well, I will say this, that the folk you just mentioned then, I have known for quite a long time and are friends with them. So they know me on a personal level, which, again, it's who you know, not what you know. But I certainly think that if my riding wasn't necessarily at the level I was at, I wouldn't have some of the success I've had. Certainly, my riding has done a lot of the talking for me. And when I was younger, I always thought that's kind of how you did it, that you get to be as good as you can be, and your riding is how you get the deals. And that is true to a point, but I do find a lot of the time it's the loudest person is the one who gets the most rewards. And I'm definitely not the loudest person.
But I mean, when you think about that, as someone who's amassed over 100,000 subscribers on YouTube, I can see the play button very proudly displayed in the background there. You have to have played the game a little bit there in terms of, you know, getting the YouTube algorithm to like the stuff that you're doing, being able to talk presentably to a camera, making the right thumbnails and stuff. That can't have been easy to get your head around.
Honestly, starting YouTube was one of the hardest things that I think I've done. Going from someone who I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror just a few years ago. Honestly, I was like, I didn't like the look of my face, let alone putting my face out to like potentially thousands of people. So that was one of the scariest things that I've done. But at the same time, I kind of want. There's a few aspects to why I started, but getting over that fear was one of them. And now I've no issues with looking in the mirror, talking to camera, being in front of a camera on TV, being on a stage, things like that. Through being uncomfortable and doing it more and more has become less scary. But the whole YouTube thing as well, I think I had quite a bit of a head start knowing Danny McCaskill, knowing a lot of some of the bigger names who can be in my videos. Definitely has a bit of a boost. And I think without those, I probably wouldn't have had some of the early success that I had. So with me being at 100,000 views now, I think I wouldn't be where I am now through my personality or skills with using YouTube and knowing the algorithms, because I still don't know how to do that. I think a lot of my early success was, again, who I knew.
And it seems that's worked really well. When you look back, I mean, saying about the things like learning about YouTube and getting better at these things, which initially were a real struggle. One of the things that I remember reading in that initial Trials Forum post that you put out, which made me feel really sad at the time when I read it, was that you said you'd never had a real job and that you felt like you probably never would, and that you'd never had a girlfriend, and that, you know, complex relationships like that were a real struggle. Now that post, I think it was 2005, so it's about 17 years ago. So fast forward 17 years, you've had a myriad of incredibly complex jobs. You've had a career as a competition trials rider. You've worked for Tarty Bikes, which is, even though it is a lot to do with bicycles and stuff, is still, as far as I could tell, an office-based 9-to-5 job where you had targets to meet and things to do and stuff. And then you've become a very successful YouTuber. And as far as I'm aware, you're now getting married. So things have really changed in that way. How does it feel looking back on where you were when you wrote that in 2005 to where you are now?
It's funny what a couple of decades can do. Yeah, certainly, like Tarty Bikes. Before I worked at Tarty Bikes, I did work at a local bike shop in Hebden Bridge. I wasn't there quite full time. I think I was just there part time, and there were still aspects of that job that I struggled with.
Yeah.
A lot of that was obviously being in a bike shop. You have members of the public coming in, and I actually really struggled to do the interaction with the public, and I never truly figured out how to work the till. So I was like panicking anytime anyone came in, and I had to sell them something. So then I kind of ended up kind of just going into the workshop and becoming more of a workshop guy, which suits me way better. And then Tarty Bikes came along, and that is still the longest like proper job that I've held. And I think I was there for, I actually don't know, it was either 2 and a bit years or 4 and a bit years, one or the other, so long ago. And that was great. I really actually quite liked it there. It was a little bit of a commute to get there. It was like an hour and a bit either way, but working around the specific interest that I had, trials bikes was amazing. It was online, so I didn't have to deal with any members of the public coming in. It was a subject I knew a lot about and learned even more while working there, working with Adam Reed, who's an amazing mechanic and just a great-minded guy, smart as anything. Learning from him was amazing. I learned a lot. So yeah, that was, as far as jobs go, quite an easy job for me to slip into and thrive in. But since then, yeah, done comps. I'd say my comp career wasn't, calling it a career I think is a bit of a push, but I did comps for a bit, never earned any money doing it, so that's why I don't call it a career. And then yeah, the demos and YouTube and relationships have come as I think the relationship aspect definitely came about from doing demos and becoming a bit more confident, being around Danny, Duncan and the guys who are quite confident guys. They like to go out to pubs and clubs. They dragged me out a few times, and yeah, they really helped get my kind of confidence up in the social aspect. So yeah, obviously worked because I have a fiance now who I like very much.
Wonderful. Is that how you met Jane? Were you in a pub somewhere, or?
No, so we actually met online on Plenty of Fish, which is like way before Tinder or anything came around. But she knew of me through shows. So she'd actually been to a drop and roll show or a clan show. Yeah, a clan show. And it's funny because she's got a photo on her Facebook page of her getting a selfie with Danny. And there's me in the background just sat on like the biggest box, just kind of like twiddling my thumbs on my own. And it's like before we started dating, there's a picture of her with me in the background. And then yeah.
Do you reckon she just wanted to get a photo of you but was too nervous to ask somehow, and that was how that happened?
Maybe. Certainly we've had some parties in the flat, and through a kind of like a friend of a friend, she came to these parties. So she had met me there, or certainly she says she met me there, but that's the time when I first moved to Glasgow and was kind of new to like the whole going out socialising. So I did a bit more drinking back then. I was actually quite drunk, so I don't really remember it too much. Fortunately, I didn't leave too much of a bad impression. So
if it's all worked out now, then that's great.
Eventually I got on like Plenty of Fish, saw her, liked her profile, got talking, and yeah, met up and got on very well.
I mean, that's the great thing, I think, about this. Why I kind of wanted to have this sort of conversation as well is I can just remember being a frustrated young man who struggled socially and was worried about sort of the big world and stuff. And if there are any other neurodiverse people that are watching this and are struggling, then hopefully they can see, two guys who had the same kind of thing who've also just about managed to do okay. I mean, you're getting married. I have a 7-week-old baby who amazingly hasn't cried. She's right in the next room and hasn't cried for the duration of this video.
Well, congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, that's something I never thought I would get my head around, is having such a commitment to something like that. But it
sounds terrifying.
It is. It really is. But it's also kind of yeah, because of I feel like I've taken to it pretty well. But ask me in 18 years how that's going, and I'll come back to you. But I mean, that's another interesting thing as well when you use the word like terrifying about social things like that. I don't know if neurotypical people would ever really understand. I mean, you and I have both done pretty dangerous things on bicycles in front of pretty large crowds. And I don't think people will ever really get that somehow that is less scary than going and talking to a person, and or going into a building that you don't know, or being in a crowded place. Do you ever think that there's, if you had to, how could you describe that to someone if you needed to?
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? I think that the riding, we've done it so much and built up, and we find the progress is quite addictive, especially with trials. I find a lot of it is a thinking thing, it's a puzzle. You have to work out how to get your bike from A to B, and if you don't make it, it's obvious you don't make it. And then again, it's if you do make it, it's very black and white. It's like either you did it or you didn't do it. And I think it's that clear, you either do something or you don't do something. There's no in between. And when you go to socialize with people or you go into a new place, it's you can't judge how things going, or it's so new that it's not a black and white situation. There's so many variables, and it's kind of a fear of the unknown. I think that's what gets me. So certainly when I was younger, to go and talk to a stranger, it's not a case of, it's like you either get up something or you don't. You talk to someone and they might say something that you didn't quite hear, and it's like, oh, what do I do
It's
now?
the unpredictable nature of that, isn't it?
I think you're right there with the riding. It's quite a predictable thing. You're in control of the bike, and when you're talking to someone or going to a new place, it's that lack of control of the situation. I think that's the really terrifying thing. So I think you hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah. Like the bikes and the terrain are relatively a lot more predictable than people are. I can imagine that's definitely an easier way of looking at things. I've gone through sort of most of the questions I wanted to ask, but there was kind of one sort of left, which was that, and I sort of ummed and ahed about whether I should ask this question or not, but I guess it's something that a lot of people might wonder, which is that if you could change this aspect of yourself, if you could have a quote unquote neurotypical life like your brother or your sister did, then would you do it? Do you think you'd want to change this aspect of who you are?
I have thought about this quite a lot, and I don't think I would. I think I look at a lot of, say, normal lives, and I don't know whether it's just me thinking because I've got the brain I have, but I wouldn't want a normal life. I like that I've become really, really good at this one particular thing. Just working a normal job, going through a normal life, there's certain aspects which I think would be quite nice, but as a whole, no, I don't think I would change my journey and how I am.
I think what's really interesting now, especially from my work and studies as a therapist and having sort of developed a lot of understanding about neurodiversity with that, is that idea of normal is becoming less and less of a thing as more and more people are getting diagnosed with things like ASD or ADHD, or getting help for depression or anxiety or anything like that. This idea of a normal person is starting to erode away quite quickly. And I think I'd agree with you as well. I mean, I look back at like some of the instances of being bullied in school, or being really frustrated with things, and not being able to understand stuff. And there are times when I wish, oh God, I wish I could just handle this a bit better. But I agree with you. I think on the whole, I don't think it would change. But thinking about this, I mean, I remember you saying at the start of this that you, like, animals used to be the thing which really, got you excited about stuff. You go out in the woods and turn rocks over and things like that and look for stuff. And now, sort of for the last almost 3 decades, really, it's been bikes. And one of the things that I've noticed you mention a couple of times in your videos, and I'm 35, you're a bit older than me as well. I'm starting to experienced this as well, is a bit of pain, aches, joints, not quite, fingers don't bend as much as they used to and stuff like that. Can you imagine, would you have any idea what the next thing is for Ali Clarkson if bikes have to become something that is more of a part-time thing, which I know is like saying to you, just don't breathe as much as you used to. But is there anything on the horizon that's looking really interesting and exciting that you might like to turn your very talented and focused mind to?
Over the years, I go through stints of maybe feeling fairly depressed, and one thing is that I have no idea what I would do if I can't ride bikes or my body gives up, because I don't have any qualifications. I don't have a lot of the things that you'd need to do normal jobs, like patience or the willpower to do a job that I don't enjoy. I think I would really, really struggle to work for someone else, unless it was like a Tati Bikes style situation where it's like really specific to my interests. So yeah, I've given it some thought, and I have no idea what I would do if and when the time comes that I have to give up riding. The only thing I can imagine is working as a mechanic in a bike shop. I think whatever I do would probably have something to do with bikes in one way or the other. It's just trying to figure out what that would be.
And I guess that's the best thing about that, despite you saying you're not sure what you would do, is the idea that there would be something. And I can remember exactly that kind of thing when I was a teenager, after getting some really horrible GCSE results and talking to my dad and saying, I don't know what I'm going to do with the future. And he said, most people don't. You just figure it out. So I'm equally hopeful for both of us that whatever it is that does come next, we will figure out what happens after we ride bikes.
I remember my mum saying decades ago that she didn't figure out what she wanted to do until she was 40, and that's always quite a big comfort. So I'll be 39 in February, so I've still got another year to figure out what I want to do when I'm older.
I'll be 36 in February, so maybe the fact that we're both Aquarians could be something to do with autism. I don't know if that's a link, but yeah. Ali, it's been amazing talking to you about all this stuff, and thank you for being so candid and honest about it. If we think about anything else that we do want to talk about, then I'm sure we should do this again. And I know at some point I'm at least going to be in Yorkshire, if not Scotland. So it would be really awesome if we get together and have a ride sometime. And thank you very, very much for talking to me today.
Thanks for having me.